If I had a nickel for every time Disney made a Star Wars show in the 2020s beginning with the letter A that dealt heavily in the theme of moral complexity, I'd have 2 nickels.
Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
The similarities between the two shows end there, however. Well, except their budgets, I have no idea how The Acolyte cost $28 million an episode, considering it was almost exclusively shot in a soundstage, but that's beside the point. We have, as a culture, largely entered a new era of storytelling where our storytellers no longer want to create simple, noble myths such as the one we were introduced to in 1977, and so we find ourselves surrounded on all sides by shows that depict terrible people being terrible to one another, deeply flawed men and women who find it easier to be bad than to be good, and, of course, 2 extremely different Star Wars shows that seek to urge their audience to consider aspects of this galaxy they had not considered before. Although, honestly, that statement is too generous towards The Acolyte, which is less interested in prompting its audience to think than it is in making its viewers turn their backs on everything they used to believe, but we'll get to that shortly. Despite the apparent thematic kinship of these 2 shows, they could hardly be more different due to 2 major factors: intention and execution. So let us take a look at how Andor and The Acolyte write their good guys and their bad guys, and why the former succeeded in making its audience think, wonder, and ponder, while the latter only succeeded in making everyone mad. You might be tempted to ask, why? What does it matter? Do you just want to dunk on The Acolyte?
The power of many.
No, my dear imaginary friend, if I wanted to do that, I would have done it a year ago when everyone else was. I make this video now because the story of Andor is complete and its various character arcs which carry its central theme have all reached their conclusions. But more importantly, I am talking about these stories because Star Wars matters. It has for almost 50 years. It has had immense cultural impact. It has shaped young men and women for decades. It has given us some of the most inspiring and admirable characters in modern fiction, and I desperately want it to mean something again. And really, that's where The Acolyte fails. It's empty, inane, and fruitless. So let us start there, examining how The Acolyte writes heroes. The traditional heroes of Star Wars are, of course, the Jedi, the noble guardians of peace, justice, and freedom who have protected the galaxy for millennia. Now, those are pretty broad principles. It should be easy to provide examples of how those general ideals are applied in some particular unique circumstances. What more nuanced aspect of the Jedi does the Acolyte manage to tease out? What facet of their philosophy does it explore? None. Nothing, absolutely nothing at all. The only motivations the Jedi have in this show are 1, train Force-sensitive kids, and 2, keep the Senate away from their business. Now you might think that second point is one worth exploring, and I would absolutely agree. Too bad the show completely fails to do that. Why do some of the senators distrust the Jedi? Well, this one apparently believes they can't control what they claim to control.
We don't control the Force.
Not the Force. Your emotions.
And that's pretty much it. This one dude not trusting their stoic ways is the entire shown justification for all the various cover-ups the Jedi commit. Sol not telling everyone else about him killing Anastasia, which was obviously completely justified even if the show wants you to believe it wasn't. Trinity not reporting the entire Brendok incident to the Jedi Council, and Master Green using her dead friend as a scapegoat, and telling the Senate committee he was responsible for murdering numerous Jedi. Why did the Jedi do all these things? Why would they go against the ideals of freedom and transparency? Something public image, something Senate oversight. I suppose it would make a lot more sense if we knew the Jedi to be, if the Jedi had previously been established as egotistical bureaucrats whose chief aim was to maintain their position of authority within the galaxy. Problem is, that is absolutely not who the Jedi have been. It's not that the Order has been portrayed as perfect. It has always been made up of flawed individuals who are quite capable of making mistakes, but the Acolyte is asking you to believe as a foundational truth about the Jedi Order that they are, as a group, unquestioningly willing to go along with a cover-up for the sake of their image. Yeah. No. Not happening. If you want to show me Jedi who struggle, who fail at times to live up to the ideals of their order, I'm all for that. But to cast aside and tear down everything we knew to be true about the Jedi is just plain insulting. If you want a specific example of how the show completely and purposefully misunderstands Jedi, let's talk about Master Floatybeard when he was a Padawan stationed on Brendok. Now, he's in his mid to late teens here, seemingly on the verge of becoming a Jedi Knight. He should, theoretically, have come a long ways in terms of mastering his emotions, his attachments, and all that Jedi stuff. Instead, Padawan Floatybeard spends the entire episode whining about wanting to go home to Coruscant.
I'm just sick of eating Nuna legs. And I want to go home to Coruscant.
Not only is this ridiculous motivation a cheap way for them to shovel the plot forward,
And those girls are the proof. This is our ticket home.
it makes no freaking sense considering, how Jedi comport themselves and have always comported themselves. I would expect this kind of attachment would have been drilled out of Padawan Floatybeard by the time he was 9, let alone 16. That might not be the worst character assassination the Jedi suffer in this show, but it is perhaps the most telling. I would imagine an order made up of former teenagers like this one would be vastly immature and stupid as the Jedi are written to be in the Acolyte. Bro, that's obviously not your former Padawan. How can you not tell? And isn't this fun? Don't you love being told how the warrior monks you have admired since you were 8 are actually a bunch of self-centered morons? I feel like the Acolyte is a representation of a viewpoint that can be adopted as one ages and realizes that adults are not, in fact, omniscient superhumans who can do no wrong. Realizing that her parents or role models are human and thus flawed, the child-turned-adolescent resents them for not being perfect, leading her pendulum to swing wildly and make them out to be far worse than they actually are. Andor represents a different, more nuanced, and healthier viewpoint. In this instance, when a child grows up and discovers the weaknesses in his parents, he might in fact appreciate them all the more. He understands, because he has actually matured, that mom and dad, despite their defects, still sacrificed for him, still set an example for him to follow. In all likelihood, he appreciates them more than ever specifically because he now knows they are thoroughly imperfect people who strove for goodness nonetheless. And this is how Andor writes heroes. What Tony Gilroy and company set out to do, and did exceptionally well, was show us the human cost of the rebellion. Not only the number of lives lost, but the price paid by individuals who gave up their decency, their morality, their very souls for the sake of their cause. Luthen's monologue in the first season lays it out in clear yet poetic fashion.
I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I'm damned for what I do.
Andor never stripped the characters of their meaning, never made them out to be gutless half-wits lacking any virtuous ethos. Pretty much every member of the rebellion whom we meet has a strong moral compass, but they are willing to wander off trail if their fight seemingly demands it. Were Andor seen in a vacuum apart from all other Star Wars, we would still understand why Luthen, Cassian, Mon Mothma, and the rest of the rebellion act as they do at times. Andor's empire is every bit as evil as the one which we witnessed in the original trilogy. It's just more subtle about it. It is, then, quite obvious that the rebels are on the good side. The Acolyte, viewed in a vacuum, is bland and uninteresting. A story with characters whose motivations turn on a dime as the story demands.
Is surrender myself to Kelnaka, and then turn myself into the Jedi. No.
The Jedi got what they deserved.
And with no one to root for because they all just kinda suck. Taken within the context of Star Wars as a whole, it is downright dreadful because of what it does to the Jedi. Andor, on the other hand, becomes that much better when we consider its place in the larger story. We know what Luthen, Clea, and company are working towards. This narrative grounds that struggle in the historical realities of war, of what it costs to win when losing is unacceptable.
What's most important is the cause.
It lets us sympathize with the broken people who pay an unimaginable price for that victory. That doesn't mean we need to endorse or approve of their every action. Goodness knows, Luthen does many, many things that he objectively should not do. The scene where he intimates to an astonished Mon Mothma that Tay Kolma, aka a security risk, needs to be eliminated is brilliant.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
How nice for you.
But it is also rightly horrifying. Andor asks its viewer to hold in tension the idea that these heroes act at times like villains. Should they? No. but they do. People do. There's not a war that has been fought, certainly not in the last 100 years, where both sides, including the ones undoubtedly in the right, have abstained from objectively morally depraved strategies in order to further their cause. This is how you properly write moral complexity into your story. You imbue your characters with it. Good and evil do not change, and the two sides of the conflict will largely stay on one side of the line in a myth such as Star Wars. But people are notably complex creatures, capable of choosing the noblest of goods in one moment and the most despicable of evils the next. Speaking of despicable, let's talk about how the Acolyte writes villains. That is to say, they write despicably, but they do not actually write the villain to be despicable, even though he definitely is. The villain, in everyone's favorite show, isn't really evil, you see. His embrace of fear, anger, and all the rest isn't evil, isn't the dark side, it's
Semantics.
all he wants is to be left alone to wield the Force in whatever way he so chooses, to train a Padawan.
An acolyte.
Okay, so why did you have your Acolyte assassinate Jedi? Surely there are other ways to train an apprentice, no? Yeah, sure, May wanted revenge, but why even agree to train her if she's going to jeopardize your little libertarian Force crusade by bringing unwanted Jedi attention down on top of you? Clearly, Kemir, Jason from The Good Place, has obtained plenty of power without drawing the Jedi down on his head. It's not at all a stretch to think he could train May, or someone else, and still maintain his secrecy. But Darth Jason's intelligence is not on trial here. This show's handling of moral complexity is. How exactly does Jason's philosophy hold up against that of the Jedi? Well, that's a tough question to answer, considering the issue we have already discussed regarding this show's Jedi having a complete lack of guiding principles. There's no actual philosophical conflict that occurs. The show presents Darth Jason's ideas, and then they are eventually proven right by Osha finding out that Sol killed her mother, and therefore it's his fault that she had all those negative emotions which kept her from becoming a true Jedi.
How could he teach you to control your negative emotions? He's the reason you have them.
But that isn't a refutation of Jedi-branded stoicism. If anything, it's a validation of their rule against introductory ages. A rule that Sol broke, sure, but you can't exactly go from he did a bad thing to the Jedi Order's morality is fundamentally no better than that of the Sith. That is clearly what Darth Jason believes, and the show appears to believe it too. There is no right way to wield power, everyone just does what they want to do, so go grab whatever power you can and hold on to it for dear life. There's just nothing here. The Acolyte wants to deal in this complex and potentially thought-provoking theme, but it refuses to engage its characters in any sort of conversation or debate. Darth Jason's perspective, which is incredibly childish, is presented, left practically unchallenged, and then proven correct in the show's finale. Yes, the audience is definitely going to side with the guy who slaughtered a bunch of Jedi who didn't even know he had existed before this, instead of simply leaving the planet after his pupil, who didn't even know his true identity, decided that she wanted to turn herself into the Jedi. Darth Jason is obviously and objectively a murderer, but he's treated as if he has the moral high ground.
You attacked me while my back is turned?
And no one is allowed to even attempt to debunk his ridiculous philosophy. How are we as an audience supposed to respond to that? I suppose an exasperated huff and an overemphasized eye roll will have to do. Basically, the Acolyte didn't so much write moral complexity as it did moral murk. There's precious little to be gleaned from this script because the Jedi are 2-bit dum-dums and the only consistent character in the whole show, the Sith, has a painfully immature worldview that is treated as valid and profound. Its intention could not be more different from how Andor writes villains. Tony Gilroy's bad guys not only have and act according to their guiding principles, but actually possess some measure of nobility that might make you, at times, root for them. There are 4 major antagonists in Andor who exist along a spectrum of evil. Our most despicable is Director Krennic, who has no redeeming qualities and just wants to build a big old box of destruction, uncaring of whom he has to squish under his heel along the way. In the middle are Major Partagast and Dedra Meero, who represent the banality of evil within the Galactic Empire. Dedra is, at first, an entirely sympathetic character who has to deal with the usual bureaucratic nonsense that one might expect within a government organization,
I suggest you schedule an appointment.
as she tries to simply do her job to the best of her ability. It isn't until she gets her hands dirty in the interrogation/torture sessions on Therix that we witness the darkness which dwells within her. The pure utilitarianism that holds up order and control as the ultimate goods, and counts the individual as essentially worthless on the galactic scale. Major Partagast is seemingly as morally bankrupt as Dedra. He does, after all, also know exactly what's happening on Gorman in the show's second season, but his degree of separation from the tragedies and horrors on the ground enable the audience to imagine themselves in his place a little more easily. Suffering which we only ever hear about will never affect us quite as poignantly as that which we have to witness firsthand. If all one does is issue orders and hear reports, it's altogether too easy to get lost in the numbers and not remember that there are real, living people attached to those casualty statistics. I did love that Partagast's arc ended with his self-gommage. It served as a darkly beautiful reminder that the system in which he serves is brutally unforgiving. An unfortunate fact that Cyril Karn discovers quite late in the series. Before the Gorman massacre, Cyril could have almost been considered a hero. He doubtless had noble intentions, but his ambition and his superiors withholding vital information from him led him to miss the larger picture and willingly participate in the setup for the destruction of an entire civilization. It is only when that plan is revealed to him in its entirety that Cyril realizes he has crossed a line without even knowing it.
What are we doing here?
Following orders.
And that is how you write morally complex villains and antagonists. The dividing line between good and evil never gets blurred in Andor, but our protagonists sadly cross it from time to time because they see no other path to victory. And our antagonists, mostly Cyril, may not even really realize what side of the line they are on. And when they do, they are offered a choice. Accept your own depravity. You're already here, after all, or scurry back across the line regardless of the personal cost. I cannot tell you how happy I was to see Cyril choose the latter option, even if he paid for it dearly in the end. Making the right choice is always possible, this story tells us, even when we have, knowingly or not, chosen wrong time and time again. And moral complexity is simply that. It's acknowledging that humans make good choices and humans make bad choices, that good guys do bad things, and that bad guys can do good things, and then writing those fundamental truths into your story. But make no mistake, the line needs to be clear. Morally complex does not mean morally gray, which is a nonsense term that doesn't really exist anyway, but if it does, it's in the worldview proposed by the Acolyte. It's all just semantics, act according to your feelings. Unless those feelings are, I want to go home to Coruscant, then you deserve to be poisoned to death because you unwittingly set off a chain of events that led to the entire coven dying of something.
It's basic consequentialism. The morality of an action is solely judged on its consequences.
Yeah, maybe don't use your force powers to dominate the mind of a Jedi. If a power you use can straight up kill you when it gets disrupted, maybe that should have tipped you off that you shouldn't be using it. But whatever. They're totally right in this scenario because the writers said so. All that to say, the Acolyte's attempt to write moral complexity falls completely flat because it doesn't really say anything. It has no clarity, no vision, and the character arcs that are supposed to carry that theme make precious little sense and simply go wherever the plot requires. Andor could not be more different. Andor, despite taking the grand myth of Star Wars and showing us the dirty little secrets of the rebellion, still holds fast to the idea that this is a struggle between good and evil, which are clear and distinct. Most profoundly, it lets us witness that conflict on a small, personal scale within the hearts and minds of the players in this epic story. Well, thank you once again for making it to the end of another video. If you haven't already, please like the video and share it with your dog. And if you want to support this channel's mission of sharing appreciation and love for good stories, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/MasterSamwise. Thank you again. God bless you, and I will see you in the next one.